Admiral Zethkar had conquered 17 star systems without breaking a sweat. His Imperial fleet had crushed the Altarian Defense Force, steamrolled the Cetacean Alliance, and reduced the proud warrior clans of Zephon to scattered refugees. When intelligence reports mentioned a small human colony on the edge of contested space, he almost laughed. 3 destroyers. That's all he sent to deal with what the humans called Earth Defense Outpost Charlie 7. What came back wasn't his ships. It was a message, broadcast across every Imperial frequency, from a human wearing the most casual military uniform Zethkar had ever seen. The human was drinking something from a ceramic cup and looked bored. "Hi there. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, commanding officer of what you folks attacked. Thanks for the warm-up. We haven't had decent target practice in months." "Oh, and, Admiral? You might want to call home. I think your Empire's about to have a very bad day." Behind her, through the viewscreen, Zethkar could see the twisted wreckage of his destroyers being used as anchoring points for what appeared to be a small human outpost. An outpost that, according to his sensors, hadn't even powered up its main defensive systems during the entire engagement. That's when the Admiral realized he might have made the biggest tactical error in Imperial history. He had just picked a fight with humanity. And humanity, as it turned out, had been holding back for a very, very long time. What follows is the story of how the greatest military empire in the galaxy discovered that the humans they'd been ignoring weren't weak, they were just being polite. The Imperial War Council chamber buzzed with the quiet confidence that came from 3 centuries of uninterrupted conquest. Admiral Zethkar stood before the holographic display showing the latest expansion of Imperial territory, his 4 arms gesturing with practiced authority as he outlined the next phase of their campaign. The assembled fleet commanders, representatives from a dozen conquered species, listened with the attentive silence of beings who had learned that questioning Imperial strategy was a career-ending mistake. "Sector 847 remains the final holdout in this region," Zethkar announced, his chitinous exterior gleaming under the chamber's harsh lighting. "Intelligence reports indicate minimal resistance. A few scattered colonies, some mining operations, and what appears to be a minor human settlement." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the assembly. Humans were known throughout Imperial space as a curious species, technologically competent but mysteriously passive. They maintained trade relationships with several Imperial client states, operated small colonies on the fringes of civilized space, and had never once responded to Imperial expansion with anything approaching military resistance. Commander Vextai, a reptilian Sauron whose species had been among the first to surrender to Imperial might, raised one clawed hand. "Admiral, are we certain the humans require military action? In my experience, they tend to negotiate quite reasonably when presented with Imperial terms." Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what his species used for dismissive laughter. "Intelligence suggests this particular outpost may have defensive capabilities." "Nothing significant, but the High Command prefers to err on the side of overwhelming force." He manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on a small system on the periphery of the sector. "Earth Defense Outpost Charlie 7. According to our scouts, it's manned by perhaps 50 humans and mounting what appear to be outdated defensive installations." The data scrolling beside the image was reassuring in its mundanity. Power output suggested minimal shielding. Scan results indicated conventional weapons systems, possibly decades old. Crew complement was listed as minimal non-combatant personnel with standard defensive training. Even the outpost's communications suggested a routine research and monitoring station rather than any kind of serious military installation. 3 destroyers should be more than sufficient, Zethkar continued. The Blade of Dominion, Stellar Fong, and Void Render will conduct a standard suppression operation. Disable their communications, demand surrender, and establish Imperial authority. The humans can be relocated to appropriate labor assignments. What the Imperial intelligence had failed to note was that humans had a peculiar relationship with the concept of standard defensive training. Where most species interpreted this as basic emergency protocols and, perhaps some light weapons familiarization, humans approached it with the same methodical thoroughness they brought to everything else. Captain Sarah Chen, commanding officer of Earth Defense Outpost Charlie 7, had spent the better part of 2 decades in the Human Defense Corps before accepting what her superiors had described as a quiet posting where nothing ever happens. The outpost itself was a testament to human engineering philosophy, built to last, redundantly protected, and capable of operating far beyond its stated specifications. While Imperial sensors detected minimal shielding, they were reading only the outpost's standby defensive grid, a system designed to handle space debris and minor solar radiation. The primary defensive systems remained powered down, as they had been for the 3 years since the outpost's construction. Chen was reviewing quarterly supply reports when communications specialist Davis looked up from his console with a puzzled expression.
"Captain, we're getting some unusual traffic on the long-range scanners. 3 ships, military configuration, heading this way with purpose." "Identifying transponders?" Chen asked without looking up from her paperwork.
The outpost's location made it a natural waypoint for various merchant vessels, and military ships occasionally passed through on patrol routes.
"That's the weird part, ma'am.
They're not broadcasting any identification, and their emission signatures don't match any known human, Altarian, or cetacean designs.
Computer's running analysis now, but..."
Davis paused as his screen updated.
"Ma'am, I think these might be Imperial vessels."
Chen finally looked up from her reports. The Soren Empire had been expanding steadily for years, but they'd never approached human space directly. Humanity maintained a carefully neutral stance in galactic politics, trading with all sides and threatening none. The idea that Imperial forces would approach a human outpost with obvious hostile intent was genuinely surprising. "Range and estimated arrival time?" she asked, moving to the main tactical display.
"Approximately 6 hours at current velocity."
"Captain, their approach vector and formation suggests this isn't a diplomatic visit."
Chen studied the display for several minutes. 3 destroyers in attack formation, approaching a research outpost that posed no conceivable threat to anyone.
Either this was a massive misunderstanding, or someone had decided that humanity's neutrality was no longer acceptable. "All right, people, let's treat this as a potential hostile contact," she announced to the outpost's small crew.
"Davis, send a message to Fleet Command. Let them know we have unidentified vessels approaching with potentially hostile intent.
Request instructions, but don't wait for a response if things go sideways."
"Yes, ma'am." "What about defensive protocols?"
Chen considered this carefully. The outpost's defensive systems were impressive by the standards of most species, but they were designed primarily for protecting the installation against pirates or raiders, not military vessels of unknown capability.
Still, Human Defense Corps training emphasized that any position worth holding was worth holding properly. "Bring the point defense grid to standby.
Don't active scan them yet, but I want everything ready to go at a moment's notice. And wake up the primary defensive array. Don't power it up, just run system checks and make sure everything's operational."
"Captain," called out Lieutenant Morrison from the sensor station, "I'm detecting weapons lock from the lead vessel."
The casual atmosphere in the outpost's command center shifted instantly. Chen had spent enough years in the Defense Corps to recognize the moment when a situation transitioned from potentially dangerous to immediately lethal. Whatever the Imperial vessels intended, they were clearly beyond the point of diplomatic resolution. "All stations, condition red," she ordered. "Raise shields, bring weapons online, and prepare for hostile contact. Morrison, I want continuous scans of those vessels.
Davis, record everything and prepare an automated distress beacon."
If they want to fight, Fleet Command needs to know what happened here. The Imperial destroyers closed the remaining distance with methodical precision. Admiral Zethkar, monitoring the operation from his flagship several systems away, watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The human outpost had detected the approaching vessels but showed no signs of flight or surrender. Typical human stubbornness, he thought they would maintain their position until overwhelmed, then negotiate from weakness. Captain Krian AK, commanding the lead destroyer Blade of Dominion, opened communications to the outpost using the crude translation protocols the Empire maintained for minor species.
"Human installation, you are trespassing in Imperial space.
Shut down your defensive systems and prepare to be boarded.
Resistance will be met with destruction." Chen's response came back almost immediately.
Her tone was conversational, almost friendly.
"This is Captain Sarah Chen, Earth Defense Corps.
You're approaching a legitimate human research facility in neutral space.
I'm going to assume this is some kind of misunderstanding and suggest you alter course to avoid an unfortunate incident. Kree-NAK's mandibles clicked with amusement. The human actually thought she was in a position to negotiate. You have 30 seconds to comply with Imperial demands. This is your final warning.
I see, Chen's voice came back, still calm.
In that case, I'm afraid I'm going to have to decline your generous offer. This facility is under the protection of the Human Defense Corps, and we don't abandon our posts. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for generations.
The Imperial destroyers opened fire with conventional plasma batteries, expecting to quickly overwhelm the outpost's minimal defensive capabilities.
Instead, they encountered something that fundamentally challenged their understanding of human military capacity.
The outpost's shields didn't just absorb the incoming fire, they distributed it across a defensive grid that extended far beyond the installation itself. Energy readings spiked as systems that had been completely invisible to Imperial sensors came online. What had appeared to be a simple research facility revealed itself as a hardened military installation with defensive capabilities that exceeded those of most capital ships. But the real surprise came when the outpost returned fire. Human weapon technology followed a different philosophy than most species. Where others sought efficiency and elegance, human engineers optimized for reliability, maintainability, and what Defense Corps manuals euphemistically called acceptable overkill parameters. The outpost's defensive batteries had been designed to handle anything short of a full fleet engagement, and they delivered their response with mechanical precision. The Blade of Dominion's shields collapsed under the first volley.
The second volley reduced the destroyer to expanding debris.
Stellar Fong managed to return fire once more before meeting the same fate. Void Render, attempting to withdraw, discovered that the outpost's defensive grid extended well beyond sensor range when its engines were disabled by what appeared to be some form of directed energy mine.
The entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes.
Captain Chen surveyed the tactical display with professional satisfaction. 3 destroyers eliminated, 1 disabled for potential intelligence gathering, and the outpost's defensive systems had operated at approximately 15% of their rated capacity. Not bad for what was supposed to be a quiet tour of duty. Davis, compose a message to whoever's in charge of those vessels, she instructed.
Let them know we have survivors aboard the disabled ship and we're prepared to discuss their repatriation through appropriate diplomatic channels. What about Fleet Command, ma'am?
Chen glanced at the debris field that had once been 2 Imperial destroyers. Send them a full report, but classify it as a routine defensive action. 3 ships, minimal engagement, no damage to the facility. Oh, and request a maintenance team for the defensive grid. I want to make sure everything's properly calibrated in case we get more visitors.
What Chin didn't realize was that she had just initiated what would become the greatest military miscalculation in Imperial history.
The Empire had spent centuries conquering species that fought wars of survival, desperate, last-ditch struggles by beings who threw everything they had into final, hopeless battles. They had never encountered a species that considered the complete destruction of 3 military vessels to be a minor defensive action requiring routine maintenance afterward.
Admiral Zethkar stared at the tactical display in stunned silence.
The 3 destroyers assigned to the human outpost had simply vanished from his fleet's sensors. Not retreated, not been driven off, vanished. According to the last telemetry received from Void Render before communication was lost, the entire engagement had lasted less than 5 minutes. Communications, raise Captain Kree-NAK, he ordered, his voice carrying the edge that subordinates had learned to fear. Sir, we're not receiving any response from the Blade of Dominion, Stellar Fong, or Void Render. Long-range sensors indicate debris fields at the target coordinates, but... The communications officer paused, double-checking his readings. Sir, the human outpost appears to be completely intact and operational. The Imperial War Council chamber fell silent. In 3 centuries of conquest, no force had ever completely eliminated Imperial vessels without sustaining significant damage in return. The idea that a minor outpost defended by 50 humans could destroy 3 destroyers without even powering down their main systems was outside the realm of possibility. Sensor malfunction, Zethkar announced with confidence he didn't feel. Dispatch a scout ship to investigate. There must be hidden defensive installations or allied fleet assets in the area. But, even as he gave the orders, a part of his mind was processing the implications. The humans had never demonstrated military capabilities beyond basic system defense. Their merchant vessels were lightly armed, their colonies maintained minimal security forces, and their diplomatic corps consistently projected an image of peaceful technological development. Either Imperial intelligence had been catastrophically wrong about human capabilities, or something fundamental had changed. The scout ship Whisper of Night arrived at the coordinates 12 hours later. What Captain Verthak found there would reshape Imperial understanding of human military doctrine forever. The outpost sat exactly where intelligence had indicated, its modest collection of habitation modules and research facilities looking precisely as unremarkable as expected. The debris field from 2 Imperial destroyers drifted nearby in slowly expanding clouds of twisted metal and frozen atmosphere. But it was the 3rd destroyer that provided the real shock. Void Render hung motionless in space, its engines darkened, its weapons powered down, but otherwise intact. As Verthak's scout ship approached, a human voice came across the communications channel in fluent Imperial standard. "This is Captain Sarah Chan, Earth Defense Corps. You're approaching a vessel currently under our protection. Please state your intentions and maintain minimum safe distance." Verthak had never heard a human speak Imperial standard with such casual fluency, let alone issue orders with the calm authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. "This is Captain Verthak of the Imperial Scout Service. The vessel you're holding belongs to the Sorin Empire. We demand its immediate return." "I understand your position," Chen replied, her tone remaining conversational. However, the vessel in question initiated hostile action against a human facility. Under both Imperial law and galactic maritime conventions, we're entitled to salvage rights and compensation for damages. I'd be happy to discuss repatriation of the crew through appropriate diplomatic channels. You dare speak of Imperial law to a representative of the Empire itself? Verthak's voice carried the outrage of a being accustomed to absolute deference from conquered species. Chen's response came back with what sounded like genuine puzzlement. "I'm sorry, I think there might be some confusion. You do realize that humanity isn't part of your empire, right? We're an independent species with full galactic recognition. Your vessels attacked our territory without provocation. Under any reasonable interpretation of interstellar law, our response was entirely justified." The implications hit Verthak like a physical blow. The humans weren't surrendering. They weren't even acknowledging Imperial authority. They were treating this as a legal dispute between equals, as if the Sorin Empire was just another minor power that could be negotiated with rather than an unstoppable military force that had crushed every opponent it had ever faced. "Scan that outpost," he ordered his sensor operator. "I want complete tactical analysis of their defensive capabilities." The results were even more disturbing. The outpost's defensive grid was unlike anything in Imperial databases. Instead of concentrated shield generators and obvious weapon emplacements, the humans had distributed their defensive systems across a network of seemingly innocuous installations. Energy signatures suggested power generation capabilities that exceeded those of Imperial battle stations. Weapon systems appeared to be modular and redundantly protected, designed to operate even if large portions of the defensive grid were eliminated. But the truly unsettling discovery was what the sensors didn't detect. Large portions of the outpost's infrastructure were completely invisible to Imperial scanning technology. Either the humans possessed stealth capabilities far beyond anything the Empire had encountered, or their defensive installations operated on principles that Imperial science couldn't recognize. "Sir," the sensor operator reported with barely concealed anxiety, "I'm reading energy signatures that suggest the outpost is operating at minimal power. Based on the infrastructure I can detect, this facility could be generating 10 times its current output without strain." Verthak studied the readings carefully. If accurate, they suggested that the humans had destroyed 3 Imperial destroyers while operating their defensive systems at a fraction of capacity. The implications were staggering. "Open communications to Fleet Command," he ordered. "Priority Alpha transmission. Admiral Zefkar needs to see this immediately." Meanwhile, aboard Earth Defense Outpost Charlie 7, Captain Chen was having a very different conversation with Fleet Command. Admiral Maria Santos, commanding officer of the Terran Defense Corps 3rd Fleet, listened to Chen's report with the expression of someone trying to process information that didn't fit any existing framework.
Say that again, Sarah. You engaged 3 Imperial destroyers and eliminated them without taking damage?
That's correct, Admiral.
Standard defensive action. The attackers opened fire first, and we responded according to regulations.
2 vessels were completely destroyed, and we disabled the third for intelligence purposes.
We've recovered approximately 40 survivors from the disabled vessel.
Santos rubbed her temples. Sarah Chen was one of the most competent officers in the Defense Corps, which was precisely why she had been assigned to Charlie 7. The outpost was supposed to be a quiet posting for experienced officers who deserved a break from active duty. It wasn't supposed to become the epicenter of a potential interstellar incident.
Sarah, you do realize what you've done, right?
This is the first direct military engagement between human forces and the Soren Empire.
The political implications alone.
Ma'am, with respect, they attacked us.
We defended ourselves.
If the Empire wants to interpret that as an act of aggression, that's their choice, but we followed proper protocols throughout. Santos pulled up the tactical analysis that accompanied Chen's report. The defensive capabilities of Charlie 7 were impressive even by Defense Corps standards, but they were hardly unique.
Similar installations protected every major human colony and strategic facility.
What made Chen's report disturbing was the casual ease with which she had eliminated vessels that represented significant Imperial military assets.
What's the status of your defensive systems now? All systems operational, minimal ammunition expenditure.
The point defense grid used approximately 12% of available power during the engagement. Primary defensive systems remained on standby throughout the action.
Santos stared at her display.
Chen had eliminated 3 military vessels using point defense systems, weapons designed to handle incoming missiles and fighter craft, not capital ships.
The primary defensive batteries hadn't even been activated. All right, Sarah.
Maintain your position and continue monitoring Imperial activity in your sector. But I want hourly reports until this situation stabilizes. And, for God's sake, try not to start a war while I figure out how to explain this to command. But, unknown to both women, the situation was already spiraling beyond anyone's ability to control it. Admiral Zethkar had received Verthak's report and was studying the tactical analysis with growing alarm. The humans possessed military capabilities that exceeded Imperial estimates by several orders of magnitude.
Worse, they appeared to be completely unimpressed by Imperial power and showed no inclination to negotiate from a position of weakness. The Admiral faced a choice that would determine the course of interstellar history.
He could acknowledge that the Empire had made a tactical error, open diplomatic communications, and attempt to resolve the situation through negotiation. Or he could escalate, committing significant Imperial resources to demonstrate that challenging Imperial authority carried unacceptable consequences. Pride, 3 centuries of military supremacy, and the fundamental inability to conceive of human technological superiority made the choice inevitable.
Prepare the 4th battle group for immediate deployment, he ordered.
12 cruisers, 40 destroyers, and full support vessels.
If the humans want to challenge Imperial authority, we'll demonstrate the price of that choice.
What Zethkar didn't understand was that he had just made the same mistake that countless species had made when first encountering humanity. He assumed that what he had seen represented the full extent of human capabilities. The Earth defense outpost that had effortlessly destroyed 3 Imperial vessels was what humans considered a minor defensive installation, manned by a skeleton crew and operating with equipment that the Defense Corps classified as suitable for routine security operations. The Fleet Command response to Captain Chen's report was swift and comprehensive. Within 6 hours, listening posts throughout human space had been activated, and long-range sensor networks were monitoring Imperial fleet movements across 3 sectors. What they detected prompted an emergency session of the Terran Defense Council that would establish the strategic framework for humanity's first major interstellar conflict. Admiral Santos found herself briefing the Defense Council on a situation that no one had anticipated. Ladies and gentlemen, we have confirmation that Imperial forces are massing for what appears to be a significant military operation targeting human space. Intelligence estimates suggest a force of 50-plus vessels, including multiple capital ships. the silence in the chamber was profound. Humanity had spent decades carefully avoiding exactly this kind of confrontation, maintaining neutrality and projecting an image of technological competence without military ambition. The idea that the Soran Empire would interpret routine defensive action as a declaration of war had been considered so unlikely as to be negligible.
Admiral, asked Defense Minister Chen, what's your assessment of Imperial capabilities versus our own? Santos had spent the last 12 hours reviewing classified analyses that painted a disturbing picture of Imperial military doctrine.
The Empire fights wars of conquest against species that resist with everything they have and still lose. They're accustomed to overwhelming numerical superiority and technological advantage. What they've never faced is an opponent that can match or exceed their capabilities while maintaining strategic reserve.
Are you suggesting we can match Imperial military strength?
Sir, I'm suggesting that the Empire may have fundamentally misunderstood what they're dealing with.
Captain Chen eliminated 3 destroyers using defensive systems that represent maybe 5% of her installation's actual capabilities.
If they're planning to escalate based on that engagement, they're making tactical decisions based on incomplete information. The Defense Council members exchanged glances that carried decades of careful strategic planning. Humanity had spent generations preparing for the possibility of large-scale conflict while hoping it would never be necessary. The infrastructure, training, and technological development that supported their peaceful expansion had always been designed with an eye toward potential military applications.
Admiral Santos, the defense minister said carefully, I want you to prepare a comprehensive response plan. If the Empire wants a demonstration of human defensive capabilities, we'll provide one.
But, I want it absolutely clear that we're defending ourselves, not initiating aggression.
Understood, sir. Should I activate the full defensive grid?
Negative.
Let's see what they commit to this operation first. We don't want to reveal our full capabilities unless absolutely necessary.
As the Defense Council session concluded, similar planning sessions were taking place throughout human space.
Colony defense commanders checked their systems and reviewed engagement protocols.
Fleet elements began quiet movements toward strategic positions. Research facilities activated security measures that most species would have recognized as military-grade fortifications. And, in the depths of the Terran Defense Corps' most classified archives, contingency plans that had been theoretical exercises for decades were dusted off and updated for immediate implementation. The Soran Empire was about to discover that humanity's greatest strategic advantage wasn't their technology or their tactical doctrine. It was that every human installation, from the smallest research outpost to the largest industrial complex, had been built by a species that planned for the worst while hoping for the best. Captain Chen, monitoring Imperial fleet movements from her minor defensive outpost, watched the approaching force with professional interest. 50-plus vessels represented a significant commitment of resources, but it was still well within the parameters that Charlie 7 had been designed to handle. She opened a channel to Fleet Command and submitted her daily report with the same calm efficiency she brought to all administrative duties.
No change in local situation. Imperial forces continue to approach.
Estimated engagement window in 36 hours.
All defensive systems operational and ready. Request permission to activate primary defensive grid if hostile intent is confirmed.
What she didn't mention was that the primary defensive grid had capabilities that were classified well above her security clearance.
Charlie 7 wasn't just a research outpost with impressive defensive systems.
It was a test facility for next-generation defensive technologies that the Defense Corps had been developing in preparation for exactly this kind of scenario. The Soran Empire was about to receive a comprehensive education in human military philosophy, delivered with the methodical thoroughness that humanity brought to all their endeavors. The 4th Battle Group approached Earth Defense Outpost Charlie 7 with the methodical confidence of a military force that had never known defeat. Admiral Zethkar monitored the operation from his flagship Eternal Dominion, studying tactical displays that showed what appeared to be a routine suppression mission. The human outpost sat alone in space, its modest collection of installations looking pitifully inadequate against 52 Imperial vessels. All units report ready for combat operations, announced Fleet Captain Mordek from his position at the tactical console. The humans appear to be maintaining their position. No attempt at flight or surrender. Zethkar's mandibles clicked with satisfaction.
Typical human stubbornness would serve his purposes perfectly.
The destruction of a heavily defended human installation would send a message throughout the galaxy that challenging Imperial authority carried unacceptable consequences. More importantly, it would demonstrate to the Imperial High Command that their investment in the 4th Battle Group had been justified.
Broadcast surrender demands on all frequencies, he ordered. Give them one opportunity to comply before we begin bombardment operations.
The message that reached Captain Chen was delivered in the formal tones of Imperial military protocol, translated into passable human standard by automated systems.
Human installation, you are occupying territory claimed by the Sorin Empire.
You have committed acts of aggression against Imperial forces and must face the consequences of your actions.
Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Chen studied the tactical display showing the approaching Imperial fleet.
52 vessels represented a significant escalation from the original 3 destroyers, but the formation and approach vector suggested that Imperial commanders still didn't understand what they were dealing with. The fleet was arranged for maximum psychological impact rather than tactical efficiency, clearly expecting their target to surrender when faced with overwhelming numerical superiority.
Davis, open a channel to the lead vessel, she instructed. Let's see if we can convince them to reconsider this course of action. This is Captain Sarah Chan, Earth Defense Corps, she began when communications were established. I'm going to assume this is still some kind of misunderstanding.
Your earlier vessels attacked a legitimate human installation without provocation. We defended ourselves according to established protocols and interstellar law.
If you're here for diplomatic discussions regarding the survivors we're holding, we're prepared to negotiate through appropriate channels. Admiral Zethkar listened to the human's response with growing incredulity.
She was still negotiating, still acting as if she possessed some form of leverage against the most powerful military force in known space. Worse, her tone suggested genuine puzzlement at the situation rather than the terror that should accompany facing certain destruction. Human, he replied with the voice of absolute authority, you destroyed Imperial vessels and defied Imperial commands.
The penalty for such actions is the complete elimination of your installation and all personnel aboard it. You have 60 seconds to abandon your position before we commence bombardment. Chen's response came back without the slightest hesitation.
Admiral, I'm afraid I can't comply with that request.
This facility is under the protection of the Human Defense Corps, and we don't abandon our posts. However, I strongly encourage you to reconsider your current course of action.
Our defensive capabilities are more extensive than your previous experience might suggest.
Begin bombardment operations, Zethkar ordered. Concentrate fire on their primary installations.
I want that outpost reduced to debris within 10 minutes. What followed would be analyzed by military historians as one of the most one-sided engagements in the history of interstellar warfare, though not in the way Admiral Zethkar expected. The Imperial fleet opened fire with the coordinated precision of a force trained in the systematic destruction of fortified positions. Plasma batteries, missile salvos, and directed energy weapons converged on the human outpost in a display of firepower capable of sterilizing entire planets. For approximately 30 seconds, it appeared that the outcome would follow Imperial expectations.
Then, the outpost's primary defensive grid came online.
What Captain Chen had been calling Charlie 7's defensive systems were, in fact, a testing ground for the next generation of human military technology. The Defense Corps had been developing distributed defensive networks for decades, anticipating exactly the kind of massed assault that the Imperial fleet was now delivering. Instead of concentrated shield generators that could be overwhelmed by focused fire, the outpost's defenses were spread across hundreds of discrete nodes, each capable of independent operation and mutual support. The incoming Imperial bombardment struck a defensive barrier that didn't just absorb incoming energy, it redistributed it across the entire network, converted it to usable power, and fed it back into the outpost's weapons systems. The more firepower the Imperial fleet delivered, the stronger the human defenses became. But the real shock came when the outpost returned fire. Human weapons technology had evolved along different principles than those favored by most galactic species. Where others sought efficiency and elegance, human engineers had optimized for reliability, maintainability, and what Defense Corps technical manuals classified as acceptable overkill parameters. The weapons systems protecting Charlie 7 had been designed not just to defend against attack, but to ensure that anyone contemplating such an attack would find the experience educational.
The outpost's response was methodical and comprehensive.
Instead of targeting Imperial vessels randomly, the defensive systems analyzed the incoming fleet's formation, identified command and control nodes, and systematically eliminated key vessels with surgical precision. The Imperial flagship Eternal Dominion found its shields collapsed by weapons that seemed to ignore conventional defensive measures. Secondary command vessels disappeared in expanding fireballs as human ordnance demonstrated effects that Imperial metallurgy couldn't withstand.
Admiral Zethkar watched in horror as his battle group disintegrated around him.
Ships that had conquered star systems vanished under human fire that appeared to operate according to principles that Imperial science couldn't comprehend.
Weapons that should have been overwhelmed by massed Imperial firepower instead grew stronger with each passing moment. Withdraw.
All units, emergency withdrawal, he broadcast on fleet frequencies, abandoning the rigid tactical doctrine that had served the Empire for centuries.
Break formation and retreat to minimum safe distance.
But the human defensive systems had been designed by engineers who understood that any threat capable of reaching an installation's primary defenses represented a clear and present danger to human civilians.
Allowing such threats to withdraw and regroup was contrary to basic defensive doctrine.
The Imperial fleet found itself trapped within a defensive perimeter that extended far beyond anything their sensors had detected.
Vessels attempting to withdraw discovered that their engines had been disabled by some form of directed energy field that their technology couldn't identify.
Others found their navigation systems compromised by what appeared to be selective electromagnetic interference. Within 20 minutes, 47 Imperial vessels had been either destroyed or disabled. The remaining 5 ships hung motionless in space, their crews faced with the choice between surrender and certain destruction. "This is Captain Chen," came the now familiar voice across fleet communications. "Imperial vessels, you have initiated hostile action against a human facility and have been engaged according to our defensive protocols. I strongly recommend that you cease all aggressive actions and prepare to discuss the terms of your surrender."
Admiral Zethkar stared at his tactical display in stunned disbelief.
The most powerful battle group in the Imperial fleet had been casually dismantled by a single human outpost that still appeared to be operating at minimal power levels. Every assumption that 3 centuries of Imperial expansion had been built upon had just been proven catastrophically wrong. "Admiral," reported his communications officer with barely controlled panic, "the humans are requesting our immediate surrender. They're also transmitting some kind of technical analysis of our weapons and defensive systems. Sir, they appear to have complete specifications for every piece of equipment in our fleet." The transmitted data was even more disturbing than the tactical situation. The humans hadn't just defeated Imperial forces, they had analyzed Imperial technology in real time and found it lacking by their standards. Detailed technical assessments accompanied by improvement suggestions were being broadcast to the surviving Imperial vessels as if the engagement had been some form of educational exercise.
"Open communications," Zethkar ordered with what remained of his command authority.
"Admiral," Captain Chen's voice carried the same conversational tone she had maintained throughout the engagement, "I hope this demonstration has clarified our position. Humanity has no interest in territorial expansion or aggressive action, but we take the defense of our installations very seriously.
I'd like to suggest that we open diplomatic communications to prevent any further misunderstandings." What are you?"
Zethkar asked, his voice carrying the broken tone of a being whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been shattered.
"We're researchers, mostly," Chen replied with what sounded like genuine puzzlement.
"This is a scientific outpost dedicated to studying quantum mechanics and subspace field theory.
The defensive systems are just standard protection for human facilities." "Admiral, are you under the impression that this was some kind of military installation?" The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. The humans had just eliminated the Empire's most powerful battle group using the defensive systems of a research facility. If this represented standard human defensive capabilities, then every assumption about human technological development had been not just wrong, but catastrophically inadequate. "What would happen," he asked with morbid curiosity, "if we had attacked an actual human military installation?"
Chen's response carried a thoughtful pause, as if she were considering the question carefully.
"Admiral, I honestly don't know. Defense Corps installations are built to different specifications than research facilities. I imagine it would have been much more comprehensive.
Meanwhile, throughout human space, Fleet Command was processing reports of the engagement with a mixture of professional satisfaction and strategic concern. Captain Chen's successful defense of Charlie 7 had demonstrated human defensive capabilities far more effectively than any theoretical analysis, but it had also eliminated any possibility of maintaining their carefully cultivated image of technological neutrality. Admiral Santos found herself briefing the Terran Defense Council on a situation that had escalated far beyond anyone's original projections.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're now in a position where the Soren Empire has directly experienced human military capabilities.
Captain Chen's engagement was completely successful from a tactical standpoint, but the strategic implications are enormous.
Defense Minister Chen leaned forward in his chair. Admiral, what's your assessment of Imperial response capability?
Are we looking at further escalation? That depends entirely on how their command structure processes what just happened. They committed significant resources to what they thought would be a routine suppression operation and suffered catastrophic losses. Either they'll recognize that they've been operating under false assumptions and seek diplomatic resolution, or they'll escalate further out of institutional pride.
And if they escalate? Santos pulled up classified assessment reports that had been theoretical exercises until 12 hours ago.
Sir, if the Empire commits major fleet assets to a full-scale assault on human space, they're going to discover that Charlie 7 wasn't an anomaly. Every human installation from the smallest research outpost to our major industrial complexes has been built with defensive capabilities that most species would classify as military-grade fortifications. The defense minister studied the data with the expression of someone calculating the cost of decisions that had been made decades in advance.
Are you saying we're prepared for large-scale conflict with the Empire?
Sir, I'm saying that humanity has been unconsciously preparing for this possibility since we first expanded beyond Earth. Our engineering philosophy, our redundant systems, our distributed infrastructure, it's all been built by a species that plans for the worst while hoping for the best. If the Empire wants a war, they're going to get one that operates according to principles they've never encountered. As the Defense Council session concluded, similar conversations were taking place throughout the galaxy. Species that had maintained careful neutrality in Imperial expansion were quietly reassessing their strategic positions. Client states that had accepted Imperial protection were reviewing the terms of their agreements. Even within the Empire itself, military commanders who had built careers on the assumption of Imperial invincibility were struggling to process reports that challenged every fundamental principle of their strategic doctrine. But perhaps the most significant conversation was taking place aboard Earth Defense Outpost Charlie 7, where Captain Chen was explaining to Admiral Zethkar exactly why humanity had never sought military confrontation with anyone. "The thing is, Admiral, we really don't like fighting," she said with genuine sincerity. "It's wasteful, destructive, and generally unproductive. We'd much rather spend our time on research, exploration, and building interesting things. But we learned a long time ago that the galaxy can be a dangerous place, so we build our facilities to handle whatever threats might arise."
And this facility represents standard human defensive capabilities?
More or less. Charlie 7 is a research outpost, so it's actually less heavily defended than our industrial complexes or population centers. But the basic defensive philosophy is the same: build it right the first time, with enough redundancy to handle unexpected situations. Admiral Zethkar contemplated a galaxy where humanity's research facilities possessed military capabilities that exceeded those of Imperial battle groups. The implications for any species that might threaten human interests were staggering.
"Captain," he asked carefully, "what would it take to establish peaceful relations between the Empire and humanity?" Chen's response was immediate and enthusiastic.
"Well, we've always been interested in cultural and scientific exchange. Human researchers would love to learn about Imperial technology and social structures. And I'm sure there are plenty of opportunities for mutually beneficial trade relationships."
"And the military situation?"
"What military situation?" "Admiral, you attacked us, we defended ourselves, and now we're having a civilized conversation about diplomatic solutions.
As far as humanity is concerned, this whole incident was just a misunderstanding that got temporarily out of hand. It was, Zethkar realized, the most terrifying thing anyone had ever said to him. The humans were treating the complete destruction of an Imperial battle group as a minor diplomatic incident that could be resolved through proper channels. They weren't seeking conquest, revenge, or territorial concessions. They just wanted to return to their research and hoped that future interactions could be conducted more civilly. A species that could casually eliminate Imperial military forces while treating the engagement as an unfortunate misunderstanding was operating according to principles that the Empire was completely unprepared to handle. The Imperial High Command emergency session convened in the deepest bunkers of Saurus Prime, the Empire's capital world. For the first time in 3 centuries, the military leadership of the galaxy's dominant power found themselves grappling with the possibility of defeat. The massive holographic display at the center of the chamber showed the tactical analysis from Admiral Zethkar's engagement, and every data point contradicted fundamental assumptions about Imperial superiority. High Admiral Kreshtar, Supreme Commander of Imperial Forces, studied the reports with the methodical attention of a being who had built his career on the systematic analysis of enemy capabilities. The destruction of the 4th Battle Group represented more than a tactical defeat. It suggested that the Empire's entire strategic framework was based on obsolete information. "Explain to me," he said to the assembled commanders, "how a single human outpost eliminated 52 Imperial vessels without sustaining damage." Fleet Admiral Morkath, Director of Imperial Intelligence, activated a series of technical displays. "High Admiral, our analysis suggests that human technology operates according to principles we don't fully understand. Their defensive systems appear to use some form of distributed energy management that actually grows stronger under sustained attack. Their weapons demonstrate effects that our metallurgy and shield technology cannot adequately counter. Are you suggesting that human technology is superior to Imperial systems?" The question hung in the air with implications that challenged 3 centuries of Imperial expansion. Morkath reviewed his classified assessments carefully before responding. "High Admiral, I'm suggesting that human technology has been developed according to different priorities than our own. Where we have optimized for conquest and territorial expansion, they appear to have focused on defensive capabilities and technological redundancy. The result is a species that may not seek military confrontation, but is extremely well prepared to handle it when it occurs." High Admiral Kreshtar turned to Admiral Vexnil, the Empire's leading strategic analyst. "What is your assessment of human military doctrine?" "Sir, based on our observations, humanity appears to operate under what we might call defensive deterrence. Every installation, from research outposts to industrial complexes, is built with enough defensive capability to handle significant military threats. They don't maintain large offensive fleets or seek territorial expansion, but they've created an infrastructure that makes attacking them extremely costly." "And if we were to commit our full military resources to conquering human space?" Vexnil consulted classified projections that painted a disturbing picture. "Sir, our models suggest that humanity has been unconsciously preparing for large-scale conflict for decades. Their distributed defensive networks, redundant infrastructure, and technological capabilities would require us to commit resources on a scale that might destabilize our control over existing territories." The implications were staggering. The Empire controlled dozens of systems and hundreds of worlds through the demonstration of overwhelming military superiority. If significant Imperial forces were tied up in a prolonged conflict with humanity, client species might begin questioning Imperial authority. Worse, the Empire's enemies would undoubtedly attempt to exploit any perceived weakness. "What are our options?" Kreshtar asked. "Diplomatically, we could attempt to establish formal relations with humanity and treat them as a neutral power," suggested Foreign Minister Klarsef. "They've made it clear that they have no territorial ambitions and would prefer peaceful coexistence. Militarily," added Fleet Admiral Morkath, "we could attempt to develop countermeasures to human technology and prepare for a larger conflict. But our preliminary analysis suggests that would require years of development and massive resource allocation." High Admiral Kreshtar contemplated the options with growing unease. The Empire had been built on the principle that military force could overcome any obstacle. The idea that a species might be too well defended to conquer profitably was outside Imperial strategic doctrine. "Prepare a diplomatic mission," he finally ordered. "But also begin development of enhanced military technologies."
I want options available if negotiations fail. What the Imperial High Command didn't understand was that their decision-making process was being monitored in real time by human intelligence assets that had been operating throughout Imperial space for decades. Humanity's policy of peaceful neutrality had required extensive information-gathering capabilities to avoid exactly the kind of misunderstanding that had just occurred. Director Sarah Park of the Terran Intelligence Service sat in her classified briefing room deep beneath the Defense Corps headquarters, reviewing intercepted Imperial communications with professional interest. The Empire's response to the Charlie 7 incident was following predictable patterns, but the scale of their reaction suggested that they were finally beginning to understand what they had encountered. Analysis suggests they're preparing both diplomatic and military responses, reported Senior Analyst Chen to the assembled intelligence staff. Imperial High Command appears to be genuinely surprised by our defensive capabilities and is reassessing their strategic position. What about their military development programs? Asked Director Park. They're initiating research into countermeasures for our technology, but their starting assumptions are flawed. They're still thinking in terms of overwhelming firepower rather than defensive redundancy. Any weapons they develop will be useful against most galactic species, but probably ineffective against human installations. Park studied the intelligence assessments with growing concern. The problem isn't whether they can defeat our defenses. The problem is that they're going to keep trying until they either succeed or exhaust themselves. Neither outcome is in humanity's best interests. Meanwhile, throughout human space, the Defense Corps was implementing what military historians would later recognize as the most comprehensive defensive mobilization in galactic history. The difference was that for humanity, it looked like routine maintenance and system upgrades. Admiral Santos received her updated orders with the calm professionalism of someone who had spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. All Defense Corps installations are to conduct complete system checks and upgrade defensive protocols to condition yellow. Industrial complexes should activate secondary defensive grids and establish coordination protocols with nearby military installations. Admiral, asked her Chief of Staff, are we preparing for full-scale war? We're preparing to demonstrate that attacking human space is prohibitively expensive, Santos replied. If the Empire wants to test our defensive capabilities, we'll provide them with a comprehensive education. But we're going to make it very clear that we're defending ourselves, not seeking territorial expansion. The mobilization that followed would have been impressive if anyone outside the Defense Corps had understood what they were seeing. Research facilities activated defensive systems that most species would have classified as planetary fortifications. Industrial complexes revealed manufacturing capabilities that could be converted to military production within hours. Even civilian installations demonstrated protective measures that exceeded the defensive capabilities of most military installations. But, perhaps most significantly, humanity's distributed communication networks came online in full operational mode for the first time since their installation. What had appeared to be routine civilian infrastructure revealed itself as a galaxy-spanning intelligence and coordination system capable of providing real-time tactical information to any human installation that might require it. Captain Chen, monitoring Imperial fleet movements from Charlie 7, found herself with access to intelligence data that provided a comprehensive picture of Imperial strategic planning. The information was disturbing not because of what the Empire was planning, but because of what it revealed about Imperial understanding of human capabilities. They're still thinking in terms of conventional military tactics, she reported to Fleet Command. Intelligence suggests they're planning to commit major fleet assets to what they're calling demonstration strikes against human installations. They're trying to identify our weakest defensive positions for targeted attacks. Admiral Santos reviewed the intercepted Imperial planning documents with growing alarm. The problem is that they don't understand what they're dealing with. They're going to attack installations that they think are vulnerable and discover that there's no such thing as a weakly defended human facility. Should we warn them? We've been warning them. The issue is that Imperial strategic doctrine is based on the assumption that sufficient force can overcome any defense. They're not going to believe our defensive capabilities until they experience them directly. The first Imperial probe came 3 weeks later. A force of 20 vessels approached the Human Research Facility at Kepler Station, a modest installation dedicated to astrophysics research on the edge of human space. Imperial intelligence had identified the station as a soft target and isolated facility with minimal apparent defensive capabilities. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the station's director, received the Imperial surrender demand with the same puzzled reaction that had characterized human responses throughout the crisis.
This is Dr. Warren, Kepler Station.
You're approaching a civilian research facility engaged in stellar cartography.
If you're here for scientific collaboration, we'd be happy to discuss joint research opportunities.
The Imperial response was delivered with mechanical precision.
Human facility, you are trespassing in space claimed by the Soren Empire. Surrender immediately or face destruction.
I'm afraid there's been some kind of misunderstanding, Warren replied with genuine confusion.
This is a legitimate human research installation in neutral space. We're not trespassing on anyone's territory, and we're certainly not engaged in any kind of military activity.
What followed was a repetition of the pattern established at Charlie 7, but with variations that demonstrated the adaptability of human defensive doctrine. Kepler Station's defensive systems were optimized for the protection of delicate research equipment rather than military operations, but they operated according to the same fundamental principles of redundancy and overwhelming response. The Imperial probe force found itself facing defensive capabilities that not only destroyed their vessels but did so while maintaining the precise environmental conditions necessary for ongoing astrophysics research. The human defensive systems eliminated military threats without creating the kind of energy discharges that might interfere with sensitive scientific instruments. Commander Valkar, leading the Imperial probe, managed to send a final transmission before his command ship was reduced to its component atoms. They're not just defending themselves.
They're defending their research data while they destroy us.
The report that reached Imperial High Command was even more disturbing than the original Charlie 7 incident. Humanity wasn't just militarily capable, they were capable of integrating defensive operations with civilian activities in ways that suggested a level of technological sophistication that the Empire couldn't match.
High Admiral Kreshtar reviewed the tactical analysis with mounting dread. Are you telling me that human research facilities can eliminate Imperial forces without interrupting their scientific work?
Sir, the evidence suggests that human defensive systems are so well integrated with civilian infrastructure that military operations don't disrupt normal activities. They're treating our attacks as minor inconveniences rather than threats to their survival. The psychological impact on Imperial forces was devastating. Military personnel who had spent careers conquering species that fought desperately for survival found themselves facing an opponent that considered Imperial attacks to be routine maintenance issues. Worse, human defensive capabilities seemed to scale effortlessly from research outposts to major installations, suggesting that the Empire faced the same defensive challenge regardless of which targets they chose.
Sir, reported Fleet Admiral Morketh, our modeling suggests that any attempt to attack human space would require committing 70% of our fleet assets for an indefinite period.
Even then, success would be far from guaranteed.
And the political implications? Catastrophic.
If we commit that many resources to a conflict with humanity, every client species and potential enemy will recognize that Imperial forces are overextended.
We could lose more territory to rebellion and opportunistic attacks than we could possibly gain from conquering human space. High Admiral Kreshtar faced the most difficult strategic decision in Imperial history. Acknowledging that the Empire couldn't defeat humanity would shatter the foundation of Imperial power throughout the galaxy.
But attempting to prove Imperial superiority might destroy the Empire through overextension and strategic miscalculation.
The solution, when it came, would surprise everyone involved and establish the framework for a new era of galactic politics. Prepare an official diplomatic mission, Kreshtar ordered. Full ceremonial protocols, highest level representation. We're going to establish formal relations with humanity as an equal power.
Sir, asked Foreign Minister Klarseth, what about our reputation for invincibility? Our reputation was built on the systematic conquest of species that couldn't effectively resist Imperial power. Humanity has demonstrated that they can resist Imperial power quite effectively. Rather than destroying our reputation through a failed conquest, we're going to enhance it by demonstrating Imperial wisdom and recognizing when conquest is unnecessary. It was, the High Admiral realized, the most pragmatic decision the Empire had ever made. Humanity had no territorial ambitions and preferred peaceful coexistence. Establishing formal relations would provide access to human technology and scientific knowledge while avoiding a conflict that could destabilize Imperial control throughout the galaxy. The only question remaining was whether humanity would be interested in such an arrangement. The Imperial diplomatic vessel Harmony of Worlds approached Earth with all the ceremonial grandeur that 3 centuries of galactic dominance could provide. High Admiral Kreshtar had personally selected the mission's composition, senior diplomats from every major Imperial species, cultural attaches representing dozens of client worlds, and enough military escorts to demonstrate respect without suggesting threat. For the first time in Imperial history, they were approaching another species as equals rather than conquerors. Ambassador Velthera, the Empire's most experienced diplomat, stood before the massive viewing ports of the diplomatic vessel's primary deck, watching humanity's home system reveal itself through long-range sensors. What she saw challenged every assumption about human space that Imperial intelligence had maintained for decades. Earth's orbital infrastructure was breathtaking in its scale and complexity. Massive space elevators connected the planet's surface to orbital manufacturing complexes that dwarfed anything in Imperial space. Agricultural stations the size of small moons rotated in precise formations, their geometric perfection suggesting engineering capabilities that approached the theoretical limits of materials science. The asteroid belt buzzed with automated mining platforms that appeared to be converting entire asteroids into useful materials with casual efficiency. But it was the defensive installations that truly captured her attention. What Imperial sensors had classified as minimal system defense revealed itself as a network of protective systems so sophisticated that most of it remained invisible until actively observed. Energy signatures suggested that Earth's defensive grid could generate more power than the Empire's largest battle stations, while doing so with an elegance that made Imperial engineering look crude by comparison. Ambassador, reported the vessel's sensor operator, were receiving traffic control instructions from Earth System Authority. They're providing us with approach vectors and requesting our diplomatic credentials. The casual efficiency of human space traffic control was somehow more intimidating than overt military challenge. The Empire was being treated as just another visiting delegation, processed through routine administrative procedures with the same polite professionalism that might be extended to any foreign dignitary. Comply with all instructions, Velthera ordered. And prepare our diplomatic communications according to standard protocol. But, as the Imperial vessel followed its assigned approach vector, Ambassador Velthera began to understand that humanity operated according to principles that made standard diplomatic protocol irrelevant. They weren't being escorted by military vessels or subjected to security inspections. Instead, they were being guided through Earth's orbital traffic patterns with the same courtesy that the Empire might show to a merchant convoy. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Humanity was so confident in their defensive capabilities that they felt no need to treat Imperial representatives as potential threats. Meanwhile, in the offices of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, Secretary of State Maria Gonzalez was reviewing briefing materials that painted a comprehensive picture of Imperial society, technology, and strategic objectives. Human intelligence services had spent decades analyzing Imperial expansion patterns, and the current crisis had prompted a complete reassessment of humanity's relationship with galactic politics. The Empire's decision to initiate formal diplomatic contact represents a fundamental shift in their strategic approach, reported Intelligence Director Park to the assembled diplomatic staff. For 3 centuries, they've maintained power through military superiority and the threat of conquest. Acknowledging humanity as an equal partner suggests that they've recognized the limitations of pure military solutions. What are their likely objectives in these negotiations? Asked Secretary Gonzalez. Primarily, they want to avoid further military confrontation while maintaining their reputation for invincibility among their client species. Secondarily, they're interested in access to human technology and scientific knowledge. Finally, they're probably hoping that formal relations with humanity will provide them with a model for dealing with other technologically advanced species they might encounter in the future. Gonzalez studied the intelligence assessments with growing understanding. The Empire wasn't just seeking peace with humanity, they were looking for a new framework for galactic politics that didn't require the systematic conquest of every species they encountered. And our objectives? We want to establish formal recognition of human territorial sovereignty, guarantee the safety of human installations throughout the galaxy, and hopefully gain access to Imperial scientific databases. Most importantly, We want to demonstrate that species can coexist without military dominance determining their relationship. The formal negotiations began 3 days later in the chambers of the United Nations building in New York, a venue chosen specifically for its symbolic significance as humanity's primary forum for peaceful conflict resolution. Ambassador Velthera found herself facing Secretary Gonzalez across a table that had hosted discussions between world leaders for over a century, surrounded by representatives from every major human government and scientific institution. Ambassador Velthera, Secretary Gonzalez began with the warmth that characterized human diplomatic protocol. Welcome to Earth. We're honored by the Empire's decision to pursue formal diplomatic relations, and we hope these discussions will establish a framework for lasting peace between our peoples. The contrast with imperial diplomatic tradition was immediately apparent. Where the Empire approached negotiations as zero-sum competitions for advantage, humanity appeared to view them as collaborative problem-solving exercises designed to benefit all parties involved. Secretary Gonzalez, Velthera replied carefully, the Empire recognizes humanity as a technologically advanced species capable of defending its interests. We seek to establish mutual understanding and beneficial cooperation between our civilizations. It was the closest the Empire had ever come to acknowledging another species as equal, and everyone in the chamber understood the historical significance of the moment. The negotiations that followed would reshape galactic politics for generations. Rather than the territorial disputes and tribute arrangements that characterized most imperial agreements, humanity proposed a comprehensive framework based on mutual recognition, scientific cooperation, and shared defense against external threats. What we're suggesting, explained Dr. Chen, humanity's lead scientific representative, is a relationship based on complementary strengths rather than dominance. The Empire has extensive experience with galactic politics and interspecies coordination. Humanity has developed advanced defensive technologies and scientific methodologies. Rather than competing, we could collaborate. Ambassador Velthera studied the proposed agreement with fascination. Humanity was offering the Empire something unprecedented, partnership with a species capable of matching imperial power without seeking to replace imperial authority. The Empire would maintain its existing territorial holdings and client relationships, she confirmed. Humanity would be recognized as a sovereign power with territorial rights throughout your current sphere of influence. Exactly. And both sides would benefit from scientific exchange, joint research projects, and mutual assistance in dealing with external threats. External threats? Secretary Gonzalez activated a holographic display showing long-range sensor data from human deep space monitoring stations. Ambassador, humanity's expansion has revealed evidence of several potentially hostile civilizations beyond current imperial borders. Species with technology and organization that might pose challenges to existing galactic stability. The intelligence was staggering. Humanity had been quietly exploring regions of space that the Empire had never investigated, discovering civilizations that might possess capabilities comparable to or exceeding those of current galactic powers. The implications for imperial security were enormous. You're suggesting a mutual defense arrangement? Velthera asked. We're suggesting a collaborative relationship that benefits both civilizations while strengthening galactic stability, Gonzalez replied. Humanity has no interest in conquest or territorial expansion, but we are very interested in ensuring the security of our research facilities and civilian populations. The negotiations continued for 2 weeks, hammering out details of what would become known as the Terra-Imperial Cooperation Agreement. The final document established humanity as a recognized galactic power with full territorial sovereignty, created frameworks for scientific and technological exchange, and committed both species to mutual assistance in maintaining galactic security. But the most significant aspect of the agreement was what it represented symbolically. For the first time in imperial history, the Empire had acknowledged another species as equal rather than conquered. The psychological impact on imperial client species was immediate and profound. Captain Chen, monitoring the negotiations from Charlie 7, received regular updates on the diplomatic progress with professional satisfaction. The crisis that had begun with an imperial attack on her research facility was concluding with humanity's formal recognition as a major galactic power. Davis, compose a message to Fleet Command, she instructed. Inform them that the diplomatic mission appears to be proceeding successfully. Also, request permission to return to our normal research schedule. We've got 3 months of stellar cartography data to analyze, and this whole military situation has been keeping us from our actual work. It was, perhaps, the most human response imaginable to becoming a recognized galactic superpower, mild satisfaction at resolving a diplomatic problem, followed by immediate desire to return to more interesting scientific pursuits. The signing ceremony for the Terra Imperial Cooperation Agreement took place aboard the human research vessel Endeavour, orbiting the neutral world of New Geneva. Representatives from dozens of species witnessed High Admiral Kreshtar and Secretary Gonzalez formally establishing the first equal partnership in Imperial history. Today marks the beginning of a new era in galactic relations, Gonzalez announced to the assembled delegates. Humanity and the Soren Empire have demonstrated that species can coexist as equals, sharing knowledge and resources for mutual benefit rather than competing for dominance. Kreshtar's response was equally significant, though delivered with the formal precision that characterized imperial diplomatic tradition. The Empire recognizes that true strength comes not from conquest alone, but from the wisdom to distinguish between those who must be defeated and those who should be embraced as partners. Humanity has proven that they possess both the capability and the wisdom necessary for such partnership. The agreement's immediate effects were transformative. Imperial client species began requesting similar partnership arrangements rather than traditional tributary relationships. Human scientific missions gained access to regions of space that had been closed to non-imperial vessels. Most importantly, both civilizations began collaborative research projects that leveraged their complementary technological approaches. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, whose research facility at Kepler Station had been the target of an Imperial probe force, found herself leading a joint human-Imperial team studying quantum field dynamics in the vicinity of neutron stars. The combination of human theoretical frameworks and Imperial observational capabilities was producing research results that neither species could have achieved independently. "The irony is remarkable," she commented during a research briefing. 6 months ago, Imperial forces attacked our facility because they saw it as a threat. Now we're working together on projects that will benefit both our species for generations. But, perhaps the most significant change was in galactic politics more broadly. The Terra Imperial Cooperation Agreement established a precedent for relationships based on mutual respect rather than military dominance. Species throughout the galaxy began re-evaluating their strategic positions, seeking partnerships rather than simply avoiding conquest. Captain Chen, finally, able to return to her research duties at Charlie 7, received a priority message from Fleet Command that brought the entire crisis full circle. "Captain Chen," the message began, "in recognition of your exemplary service during the recent diplomatic crisis, you are hereby offered promotion to Admiral and assignment to the new Joint Human-Imperial Defense Coordination Office. Your mission would be to establish protocols for cooperative security operations throughout galactic space." Chen stared at the message for several minutes before drafting her response. "Fleet Command, I am honored by this offer, but I must respectfully decline. Charlie 7 has 3 years of accumulated research data that requires analysis, and we're on the verge of several significant breakthroughs in subspace field theory. Perhaps Admiral Santos could recommend someone who's actually interested in military command rather than quantum mechanics research." It was, Admiral Santos realized when she received Chen's response, exactly why humanity had succeeded where other species had failed. They approached challenges with professional competence rather than territorial ambition, solved problems efficiently rather than dramatically, and immediately returned to their primary interests once difficulties were resolved. The galaxy was discovering that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their defensive capabilities, it was their fundamental lack of interest in dominating anyone else, combined with their absolute refusal to be dominated themselves. 6 months after the first Imperial attack on Charlie 7, galactic civilization had been transformed. The age of Imperial expansion had ended not through defeat, but through the recognition that some species were better approached as partners than subjects. Humanity had achieved recognition as a major galactic power not through conquest, but by demonstrating that they were simply too well prepared and too competent to be worth fighting. And, throughout human space, researchers returned to their work with the satisfaction of people who had successfully resolved an annoying interruption to more important activities. They had accidentally become a galactic superpower while defending their right to conduct peaceful scientific research. It was, most humans agreed, a reasonably efficient solution to an unnecessary problem.
Imperial panic. Wait. That wasn't the full human military? HFY.